participants like me use the microphones when speaking, as the meeting is being webcast. It is being webcast. So let's start with the first item on the agenda. Michelle, do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies. We have apologies from the Chair, Councillor Adams, and a subsequent apology from Councillor Swainston, who was to be Councillor Adams's substitute.
Right, thank you. We have before us the minutes of the last meeting held on 26 September 2023. Are members content for me as chairman of this meeting to sign those minutes, or are there any amendments that you'd like to suggest? Okay, so we need a proposer, Sue Nichols, Councillor Nichols, and a seconder. Councillor Williamson, thank you very much indeed. So please can we have a show of hands to indicate whether you support the motion for me as chairman to sign the minutes of the committee meeting held on 26th of September 2023. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? So I declare that motion passed. I'd like also to welcome our two independent co-opted members, Nick and Mark, and thank you for not voting. Okay, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Good. So we have quite a lengthy agenda. There's been a lot of talk in the press about budgets and things that we probably ought to be auditing, but I'm told reliably by Mr. Linnett that these matters of budget, etc., are all going to be discussed at our next meeting on the 30th of January. So I will not take any other items of business this evening and just proceed through the agenda. The first item of which is we're very lucky to have a treasury management trainer with us, Greg Reddings, but he is training us exclusively. So there are no members of the public here, I don't think. But we do need Stephen to stop the, yeah, I will. So this training is commercially confidential, and therefore the meeting will need to move to exclude press and public on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information. And I ask you all to be aware of that. And would like to hand over to Greg.
Yes.
I'm read page 2.
Yeah.
So I move that under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act, the press and public be excluded for the meeting for the following item of business on the ground that it involves likely disclosure of exempt information falling within paragraph 3, part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act as amended. So I propose this motion and we need a seconder. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Nichols. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? So that motion is carried, and therefore I can instruct you, Steve. Webcast. gentlemen, councillors, is the annual Treasury Management Review, pages 29 to 64 on our agenda pack. And so may I hand over to you, Stephen Lennett, to present.
Thank you, Chairman. The appendix to the report is the annual review of the Treasury Management for 2022-23. Members will see on page 39, capital expenditure, and the actual capital expenditure, capital financing requirement, gross borrowing, etc., etc. So that's setting out where we were for the year, with capital financing requirement of 40 million. But gross borrowing of 31 million. So effectively, we've under borrowed and financed some of that by internal borrowing. There's then the prudential indicators as we move through on page 40. First of all, is capital expenditure, which shows the capital expenditure in the year and financed in the year. What unfinanced capital expenditure means is it's a nuance of the legislation. It does mean it's effectively borrowing. But the legislation, the Local Government Housing Act 1989, calls it unfinanced capital expenditure, but it is borrowing. So our borrowing went up by 11.750 million. Well, that's added it over there. So we then move on to page 42, in which we can see the capital financing requirement and how that then led to the capital financing requirement increasing from 28 to 40 million. Our gross borrowing position further down the page against the CFR and our under borrowing at the moment, which is effectively being financed by internal borrowing. We also have on the next page our authorised limit. Now, the authorised limit is basically what the maximum emergency amount that we would temporarily borrow for an emergency, which is 160 million. And then we have an operational boundary of 48 million. And the operational boundary is the amount that I calculate and members vote on and recommended at council. So council in March 2022 would have voted for that operational limit of 48 million, and you can see that our borrowing is 31.522, so we are below the operational boundary. Our financing cost as a proportion of net revenue stream is 2.52%, which means that 2.52% of our net revenue stream is going on paying off the financing costs of the debt. Our treasury position is then set out on page 44, which shows that we had a 1.52 million loan at 8.875%, which was taken out in 1955. And the amount that we'd have to repay to pay it off early is actually more than just leaving it to the end of the loan term, one of the joys of the Public Works Loans Board. So that has been left. We have been using short-term borrowing on the markets. So we had 30 million at a rate of 3.386%, which is somewhat below the rate that was actually in the market then. We're still using short-term borrowing in anticipation that borrowing rates will come down over the next 2 years. So we've taken a short-term position on that. We're also taking the short-term position because we plan to use minimum revenue provision to pay off some debt in the coming years. And you see that we had investments of 30.31 million, 20 million of which is in property funds, which is fixed in long-term investments. So that's our treasury position as at the 31st of March 2023. And the maturity structure of the debt, as you can see, under 12 months, 30 million, which is a short-term debt, and over 10 years, the 1.5 million that was taken out in 1955. Our investments are in the next table, which shows that it was mainly with banks and building societies, which were rated, and again, the property funds, which are there, and some cash fund managers, which is a money market fund. So our non-treasury investments, third-party loans, and I believe is to the East of England Local Government Association. The 4.92 million is in a subsidiary, which is Millstream Property Investments Limited. And the 8.594 in property, I will have to go and remind myself about that. I think that might be the balance of something. I can't remember what that one is. So it's treasury investments, non-treasury investments. Their total investments overall is 43.958 million. Then we've got on the next section, in section 4, we've got some graphs which shows the bank rate against SONIA, etc., and looking at controls of interest rate risks, and some background on the economics and what's been going on during the course of the year, some information on balances, etc. So just to look back at the year in question, the economics, etc. So we met all of our treasury indicators below where we should have been, and it does set out finally on page 64 our approved countries for investment, which we are mainly sticking in the UK. In fact, I don't think we've had any outside the UK. And that is the review of the year.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So does any member wish to comment or ask Mr. Linnett a question? Yes, Sue.
Hi, Stephen. We have, as a council, for about around 40 million of investment and 31.5 million in debt. Do the average returns on the investment exceed the average costs of the debt?
The debt at the moment is at 3.2 and the investments at the moment are about 5.2. So we're getting a greater return on the investments. Some of the we have 20 million in property funds, which are a long-term investment and take a long time to unwind to get back. We are in the process of liquidating one of those property funds and getting the 10 million back, but that's a long process to get that back. We do require a certain amount of cash for liquidity purposes as well. So, but at the moment, it's the debt that we've done because we've done some forward lending deals. We're below the market rate. So at the moment, the cash investments are at a better rate than the debt. What we will be doing is running down investments to use that to fund capital expenditure as far as possible before we externally borrow. So we're on the process of liquidating one of the property funds. The other property fund, there is currently a moratorium on cashing in, but when that is lifted, we will probably move to cash that in as well.
Thank you. That's good news.
It is. Any other question? Yes.
You put your
Thank you. Point of detail on page 39, table on page 39. So just wanted to clarify. So the table shows the gross borrowing. So for example, 31st of March 22 was 21.5 million, and that's gone up to 31.5 million this year, and as shown in the table there. The investments also shown in the table there, which last year, 31st of March 22, 45 million, now 30 million. So the investments have dropped, which understands the details later on. And the net of those two, the net borrowing figure, which is at the bottom of the table there. So 24.3 million net borrowing at 31st of March 22, which implies we had a net investment position. So our investments were greater than our borrowings at 31st of March 22. Looking at 31st of March 23, where our borrowings have gone up and our investments have gone down, the net of those, I couldn't get to the 8.9 million at the bottom of the table there, and I just wanted to check that whether that 8.9 million is the right figure in the table.
Get my calculator.
I was struggling to understand where the 8.9 million came from, because the net figure, gross borrowing of 31, investments of 30, would imply a net borrowing of about £1 million, as opposed to a negative 9 million. So quite a point of detail, but I thought it was an important figure that I just wanted to check.
I'll have to get my calculator out, Chairman.
Can we ask Carl?
I think I can see the answer to that. So the figure 8906 has been calculated by subtracting 39.211 from 30.305. But on the previous year, it was a 21.522 minus 45.840. So you've made a slight change in the formula, probably inadvertently.
I haven't. Somebody else wrote this.
Sorry, Stephen.
I'll take it away and I'll have it redone for council. Thank you for scrutinising it.
Thank you so much for spotting that. As a new councillor, I would like to understand a little bit more about the authorised borrowing limit. You mentioned the figure of 48 million agreed last year by our previous council. Will we be given a chance to discuss and approve?
Both the authorised limit and the operational boundary are set each year by full council, and it's set at full council and by budget council, because we present it as part of the treasury management investment management strategy. So it's set by full council each year. The operational boundary is set very much on what we think we will borrow in the course of the year, and therefore it's set with just a slight amount of headroom on top of it. so that we don't inadvertently breach it, but it is not some wild figure that is plucked out of the air. And it is linked back to the medium-term financial plan in that it is an affordable level of borrowing. The operational boundary is a figure of which it is emergency borrowing, which will not last for a long amount of time, but it is to cover such things as a major emergency where the council has to borrow vast amounts of money in a hurry because it's not getting any income in, because let's say there's been a massive power cut for 2 months or something, or there's been a major emergency and the centre of Hartford has been flooded for 6 weeks or something, and with pumping out, etc., etc. So it's to cover major emergencies like that where we may borrow before the Bellwin scheme can come into existence. It's also to cover things like if there was a major cyber attack, which there are, there's councils like Gloucestershire and Hackney who were cyber attacked over 2 years ago and still have not got their ICT systems back yet. So they're doing things like manual council tax collection and stuff like that. So it's to cover emergencies. It's meant to be a temporary measure. It's not meant to be an aspiration that you can borrow at. And I can tell you now, if you went out to borrow 160 million, His Majesty's government would be knocking on the door very quickly. So that's meant to cover that boundary there. The authorised limit is meant to cover the maximum amount of borrowing in an emergency. But the one that you concentrate on is the operational boundary, which is where that's where we expect the debt level to be, or just beneath it. And a breach of that would be quite serious, because that would mean we were borrowing far more than we expected to in the year. But it is decided by full council each year.
Thank you very much. No, and obviously it's encouraging that we're only at about 75% of that. So we can expect similar performance next year. Do any other members have comments or questions on this annual Treasury Management Review that Stephen has presented? Good. So there is one recommendation for this item, which is detailed on page 29 of your pack. And that recommendation is for this Audit and Governance Committee that members examine and comment on the annual Treasury Management Review and prudential indicators for 2022-23 prior to its presentation to full council for approval. I need a proposer for that. Councillor Nichols, and a seconder. Councillor Williamson. So members, could you raise your hands to indicate whether you're in favour or against? Those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? That motion is carried. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Stephen, for that presentation. Now we move to item 7, the Shared Internal Audit Service Progress Report, which is on pages 65 and 77 of your agenda pack. And Simon Martin of the Shared Internal Audit Service will introduce this report for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Members may recall TPC periodic updates about internal audit activity and the outcome of its work. This is the second update for 2023-24. The report provides members with details of final audit reports issued during September and October of this year, and internal audit work currently in progress. I'll highlight for you what I feel are the key points of the report. Paragraph 2.2 shows the outcome of 4 final reports issued recently, including the associated assurance levels and the number of recommendations. Paragraph 2.3 summarises the status of all the audits included in the work plan. 18 are currently shown as work in progress or finished, and the remaining 8 are assigned to members of the SciS team, ready to be started and worked through in the coming weeks. There's more detail on those individual audits and the work in progress at Appendix A of the report. Just to add that there hasn't been any change in the original work plan at this current point in time. Should there be any changes in the remaining months of the financial year, members will be advised in subsequent progress reports of January, should that occur, along with details of why those changes are occurring. Paragraph 2.5 refers to the high priority audit recommendations that are currently outstanding. These are essentially referenced in our report for tracking purposes. They're shown at Appendix B. There's one new high priority recommendation that's been added to the table since our last progress report. And there's an update on the two recommendations relating to payment card industry data security standards, and that's currently dependent upon introducing new software. Paragraph 2.7 onwards to 2.9 shows our performance indicators and how we currently stand against those. The key message to pick out is there's currently no risk to delivering a robust annual assurance opinion to members at the end of the financial year. Paragraphs 2.10 and 11 provide some commentary around that, and on the vacancy issues that we've had within the shared internal audit service, and importantly, the successful outcome of a recent recruitment campaign. The only other thing to highlight is Appendix C, which is a table showing how work is scheduled across the financial year as a whole. Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So any questions, any comments on that report? It's a progress report only, with the final report coming.
There's usually 4 progress reports during the course of the year. There'll be another one in January, and then there'll be a final annual report at the first meeting of the committee in the next financial year, which I think is traditionally May.
Yeah. Questions? Yes. Nick.
Yeah, just a question on the one of the high priority actions, if I may. So there's one there around court cost tracking, which talks about a potential need, but it wasn't really clear whether the proposal is that a business case be put forward. It sort of indicates that there will be a continued push for a system, but it feels like either there's a case there and a business case should be put together, or it shouldn't. So I was just keen to understand what the position was with that particular action.
At the moment, records of court costs due to the council are largely kept on manual records. Whilst that's proving effective, I think should the volume and value of court costs increase over time, I think there's the potential to come back for a business case with a case management system, just to help with the management of those particular cases.
Any other questions? Yeah. So there are 2 recommendations for this item, which are detailed on page 65 of the agenda pack. Members are recommended to note the internal progress report, and particularly to note the status of critical and high priority recommendations. So I think that's all we have to do then. So yes, this. Okay, so yes, there is no movement to recommend anything for this. So this item is just for noting and does not require a vote. So let's thank Simon, and if you wish to go, please do. So item 8 is supposed to be a progress report with the shared anti-fraud service, but unfortunately, Mr. Jennings is not here. So does anyone come to this meeting tonight with urgent questions about that? Because if there are any urgent questions, we can note them down and have them answered at a distance. No? So let us move then quickly to item 9. Councillor Britton is going to give us a section 106 update report and a 2022-23 infrastructure funding statement, which which comes up as pages 97 to 136 on our agenda pack. So yes, I'm particularly interested in this as a new councillor, Councillor Britton. So if you can go easy on the acronyms and just explain as much as you can about Section 106 and introduce us to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. I will go easy on the acronyms. I'm deputising Councillor Glover Ward, so this is quite new to me as well. So this is the annual report to the Audit and Governance Committee on Section 106 at East Hertfordshire Council, the infrastructure funding statement and the work of the Section 106 Programme Manager, Jackie Bruce. The report provides basic background information on Section 106 contribution identification, collection and allocation to East Hertfordshire Council. This includes an overview of historic Section 106 contribution collection and allocations from 1st of April 1996 to the 31st of March 2023, and details of income and expenditure in the last 5 years, which is in the chart in section 3.21 of the report. Plus, there's an update on Section 106 contributions collected and allocated in the current financial year from 1st of April 2023 to the end of September 2023. Information is also provided on the audit of Section 106 currently being undertaken. Draft feedback is very positive, substantive, the highest classification available, with only one low priority recommendation. The final report will be shared with members and reported on in detail in the next report to Audit and Governance Committee in November 2024. In Appendix A, it's the annual infrastructure funding statement for 22 to 23. East Herts Council is bound by legislation to produce and publish an annual summary of income and expenditure of the financial Section 106 contributions collected by the Council as the infrastructure funding statement. This is the fourth infrastructure funding statement produced by East Herts Council and provides detailed information on Section 106 for the last financial year, 2022 to 23. So there's new Section 106 agreements. There were 9 new Section 106 agreements signed in 22-23, providing over £107,000 in financial contributions and 9 new affordable housing units. The historic contribution information on page 7 of the infrastructure funding statement for further details on total income, expenditure and allocated and unallocated contributions from the 1st of April 1996 up to the 31st of March 2023. Also, there's the 22-23 contributions collected. A total of just over 3.6 million was received from 49 contributions, triggered the payment from 11 individual Section 106 agreements. See the IFS in page 9 for details. And also the 22-23 contributions allocated, a total of just under 3 million was allocated and spent on 14 individual projects or identified uses from 55 individual contributions from 36 Section 106 agreements. Detailed information on the individual contributions allocated in 22-23 can be found from page 12 onwards of the IFS. In addition, further information is provided on the individual capital and revenue contributions used by the Council in 22-23. See page 19. And further information on the individual projects supported with Section 106 funding across the district. You can see page 22 of the IFS. And the Section 106 Programme Manager will be providing a member briefing on Section 106 on the 7th of December 2023. Members will receive the online meeting details. And that concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Britton. So any questions, any comments from members? I also want to welcome Jackie Bruce and thank you for being here. And we do look forward to your training on the 7th of December. So presumably we'd prefer us to save our stupid questions from neophytes like myself till then, yes?
I'm quite happy to actually answer questions now.
Ah,
But to be honest, it is my specialist subject, so I'll probably bore you senseless. And, you know, I'll try and give an overview to any questions you have now, but if it's details on certain projects or funding opportunities, I'll take them outside the meeting.
Okay. Yes, councillor Nicholl.
Being a Buntingford councillor, you know what's going to come up next. I just wanted to ask, historically, I noticed that money was moved internally to fund Harton Pool, specifically the swimming pool, sort of relocated internally. Has how that the money from S106 changed now, so it has to be a specific itemised from the start where the money is going, rather than it can be reallocated?
Yes, basically previously to, I think it's 2019 when the legislation changed, we now actually have to have a named project use or named recipient within the actual wording of the individual contribution. I tend to actually always put an and or in there to allow some flexibility and to provide some security going forward if the initial project, you know, does not need the funding or changes, so that we've always got a backup, so that we don't actually have to give the money back.
Okay.
Historically, the contribution was sort of for outdoor sports or something. It was a generalism, which then gave flexibility for anyone to actually apply for it within the vicinity of that development. Going forward, it is now a lot stricter to actually allocate the funding, and this is why I rely on councillors and members and the public to actually tell me what they want, so that I can make sure they're actually written into new agreements. So unless I know about what's going on out there, I can't actually write them into the agreement.
That's really useful to know, because we've had a lot of questions on why can't you move funds from elsewhere, and that's why, because it needs to be specific. And it's really worth emphasising that if you get a planning application in, even if you object to it, it's really worth putting in what you desire for your community, because otherwise you get general outdoor sports facilities, whether you need them or not.
That's absolutely correct. You know, I do need to know. There have been several that we've put forward. What we'd actually like in section 106 is it's gone to planning appeal, it's been refused. But unless, you know, if it is then allowed appeal, unless we actually know what you want and can write it into the draft document, we are stuck with what the planning inspector actually gives us. So that's what we do. Going back to Hartham and Grange Paddocks, they are our destination flagship sports and leisure facilities, and there is the sports and leisure strategy actually emphasizes that they are the destination ones that will have the money going towards them. So that's why, you know, it might not be a development next door to Grange Paddocks or to Hartham, but because the actual resident or the new residents of the development will be using those leisure facilities, that's why the funding is there. And the section 106 funding goes to offset the borrowing that has gone into these major projects.
Even though those projects are sometimes 15, 20 miles from where the development happened. But it's very interesting to note that actually I didn't understand that you are involved in the S106 process from the get-go, not just in the distribution afterwards. So we can bother you about all these matters from the start. Thank you very much for making that clear. I'm looking forward, as I say, to December 7th to find out more. Do any other, yes, a couple here. Ian.
Apologies. Affordable housing jumps up, page 118 or page 6, depending on which numbering system you're using. Only one agreement signed in 22-23 include provision to provide affordable housing on site, and then for only 9 units. Is that a historically unusual figure, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Last year was a particularly bad year for section 106.
Right.
and that for new agreements. Historically, we've had some very big developments come on board, which have had Section 106 agreements with significant amounts of affordable housing and financial contributions to the council. Last year, there was a very few developments that where the Section 106s were actually signed in that year. So unfortunately, this is a bit of a blip. We normally have much more than that. If you go to the website, the Start's website, and you search for Section 106, or more importantly, infrastructure funding statement, you will see the previous ones there that will actually give you more information on earlier years where we had more affordable housing and bigger contributions coming in.
Councillor Hart.
I'm a bit confused by a bit of a blip. I mean, it's difficult because it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine about the lack of affordable housing and the allocations that come forward in developments being significantly lower than would meet local needs, particularly when we're looking to try and fund public sector pay. I mean, you know, people working in the public sector tend to earn less than the private sector, and we can't run schools, hospitals, anything else without them, really. So I've never really understood why the allocation of affordable housing doesn't meet the needs of the local population. So I'm a bit confused about how where did this, what is a bit of a blip then?
That's my turn of phrase, because I've monitored it over the last 5 years, and some years we get more Section 106 agreements through. So therefore we have a bigger number of affordable housing listed. It is when a development comes forward, the actual developer and the planning officers and myself are bound by these supplementary planning documents as to what we actually ask for in financial contributions and amount of affordable housing.
Okay.
However, this is all flexible and negotiated due to the fact of viability. A developer can say that it is not viable to actually provide this amount of financial contributions or this amount of affordable housing. And that's when we actually then get into a negotiation stage where we actually negotiate with the developer to get the best possible outcome. But it does come down to viability. And again, they can actually take it to a planning inspector, to an appeal if we turn it down, and then we're bound by their outcome. So we always put, as a council, we always push to get the maximum affordable housing that we possibly can. And I always push to make sure that affordable housing comes before financial contributions, because we do need more housing.
Can I just ask one last question? It is my last question. Do the planning inspectorate always put the viability of the development, financial viability in terms of the developer's costs above the needs of the local population then? I mean, obviously planning inspectors are a government body and they're there to you know, oversee the wholeness of it. They shouldn't have a biased perspective just in terms of financial gains for developers. Is that always the case that they will prioritise that first and not look at the overall needs of a population? So, you know, if East Herts can say that we need this 40% of affordable housing, otherwise we can't actually house our population properly, would they not take that into consideration when they're looking at appeals, or is that?
They do take it into consideration, because when we go to planning inspector or appeal, we actually provide a full written report to justify what we're actually asking for. And, you know, a developer will actually bring on board a viability thing. There are certain Section 106 agreements that we now have where we have listed what we want and they're written into the agreement, but they're subject to a viability process at the end of the development. So once actually everything has been built, sold and whatever, we then go back and have a meeting with the actual developer. An external person comes in to actually do the viability review, because it is a very specialist subject area to do a viability review to see whether or not there is enough funds in the pot to actually, you know, pay the contributions.
Yeah, I can see it's a complicated thing. It's very complicated, but I mean, It's just that we don't need to kind of do lots of complicated calculations. No, we don't have enough affordable housing, and we have a housing crisis, particularly for people on average or lower incomes, or even actually just above average. I mean, anything really that isn't quite a significant income, and first-time buyers is.
I'm very aware
challenging.
that Mr. Leonard wants to intervene. Would you like to add your thoughts?
It's just to contextualise where we are in the life of the district plan, because in the life of the district plan there is the major sites have now have made their applications and their section 106s have been signed. The only I think there's one remaining site in the Hertford area, and then there is Gilston and the garden villages in Gilston. Now the only remaining major sites left. Gilston, they're not in a position yet to submit their planning application. In the case of the one in Hertford, that's not ready to rock and roll yet. And we all know where we are with City Heart in Bishop Stortford. So in terms of major applications coming forward, most of the district plan has now come forward, and we already have the section 106. Section 106 occurs when there's 10 or more houses in an application. And they more or less, so that it'll count like that. And when it comes to viability, there are strict, the government sets out strict viability calculations that we have to take into account in order to go through that. And yes, it breaks my heart, councillor, that we can't insist on the houses, but if the viability and assessment says we can't have them, the government mandates that we can't have them.
But I would say that the elephant sitting in this room is the 40%, 23% of affordable housing in Gilston. And is that what you're thinking about, Councillor Hart?
And it's a general principle. I mean,
It is a general
It
principle.
came up in the one that's going to happen. Sorry, is it towards Brickenden that way? Whereas Birch Green. So it's not just in Gilston, but in other applications that have come to council and been approved, is the amount of affordable housing is significantly below the amount that we need. And the problem with that is that ultimately we leave ourselves with somewhat of a demographic crisis in the end. That I kind of like to call it the Pied Piper moment, where we encourage all our young people to go and live somewhere affordable for them. And then what do we do in terms of providing ourselves with essential workers that we need to keep a viable community going? And viable is not just about the finances of it. Viable is about making a community work. And I quite often think we talk about in terms of building houses. We never really talk about building communities, which ultimately that is the aim. We're not just putting bricks together. It's my favourite phrase, you know, a brick, you don't need to teach a brick anything. But you know, you do need to teach a child. So it just somehow I just feel there's a disconnect between the needs of the community and the way that housing allocations is made. And I'm just curious about why the needs of the community aren't featuring higher up in the decision making when we all know that that's what the community needs. To me, it just doesn't make sense. I know I'm a bit naive and new to all of these things, and government guidance is government guidance. I'm well aware of that, but I suppose that's where I kind of put that one to bed for the moment, I suppose.
Well, I think it's great
Be here all
that you've
night,
raised
though.
that point, because I think I certainly back to what you're saying. But I think you're saying that this is something where actually, if the developer doesn't have the money, they're not going to build the houses. So you know, it comes down to dollars and cents, which is not what we wanted to do. But thank you so much, Jackie. Sue, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was interested in NHS ICB allocations, because I know that Buntingford has contributed a lot of money to ICB NHS payments, but we've got an issue where our primary care is under threat, and I wonder how they decide where. I think it goes centrally, doesn't it, the money for that, and then they decide where it's allocated. We've got a position where we've contributed a lot of money historically, but we've got services under threat. Well, how's the need defined?
I can't actually comment on the need because
Thought you might, yeah.
technically I'm just the collection authority on
Yeah.
behalf of the ICB.
Yeah, I thought we might.
When a planning application comes in, the ICB is a statutory consultee. So they actually then put forward their requirements for all health and acute mental health and GP practices, as well as hospital need. That is then written into the section 106, and then I just collect the actual funds and then transfer it on receipt of agreed paperwork, because we need an audit trail. So I can't actually comment. No, we as East Herts Council have no input on what the ICB actually ask for or where the
Yeah.
actual money is spent, because it is taken at a more strategic level than me.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know the answers
Yeah,
to those things, wouldn't it?
I,
Wait
I would
until the
suggest you
7th.
contact
Yes.
the ICB.
Thank
Mark
you.
Poppy has had his hand up for a while.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of observations and the question. First of all, I think it's quite innovative of the council to have a Section 106 officer, because lots of district councils and boroughs don't have them. So it's, you know, credit to the council for having the post. And secondly, viability is becoming more and more of an issue, you know, particularly post the sort of the pandemic. So although obviously every council would like more and more housing, that it has to be viable for both sides to sort of actually happen. Otherwise, you won't get the developments full stop. The question is a couple of questions. One is linked to the councillor's question. Do the county and the ICB contribute towards the running of the service? Because obviously you're collecting money, which then obviously goes to the health service. Do they contribute to, or could they contribute to supporting the posts that collect the money on their behalf?
No, is the simple answer. But the good news is that we do actually collect a monitoring fee, which goes to supporting my role.
Right. Okay.
The,
Excellent.
the law changed in 2019, because previously we could, and then there was a legislation change, but it changed back in 2019, and we can now actually put forward a monitoring fee.
Excellent. And the second question was that you mentioned about obviously collecting the money, but my understanding is if it's not sort of spent within a sort of certain period of times, then the developer will be knocking on your door asking for the cash back. Is that
10 years.
is that been a problem at all?
We've only had one instance, I understand, in the historic record of Section 106, and that had to be returned because the money could not actually be used for the set contribution use. So there was no point us actually holding on to it, because we could not actually use it for what it was meant to be used for due to a change in circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd just like to also point out that the average is 10 years. Most Section 106 agreements have 10 years written in. There are quite a few new ones coming on board that have 5 years, which puts pressure actually on me and the named recipients, because, you know, it can take quite a while if it's a big project to actually get it off the ground and get it moving forward. So just to be aware that, you know, there are pressures on Section 106 spending.
And last very quick question: how does it work with the county council and their collection of 106 money?
They actually collect their own contributions. They identify their own contributions and collect their own contributions, and they too have a monitoring fee to cover the costs of that.
Right.
We don't actually get involved, and we can't double fund. So I cannot fund anything on a school premises because that's funded by the county council. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Deering.
Yes, thank you very much. I just thought I might mention, just for the awareness of members of this committee and people in the room this evening, that the NHS is not always a very good responder to an invitation as to whether they can see a reason for a Section 106 contribution. And when I say they're not a very good responder, that's putting it politely. Well, indeed, I'm trying not to make too much of it, but their track record is appalling. Absolutely. And they must have let huge amounts of money just slip completely through their fingers because they've not been able even to write a letter back to say, we've got an idea that maybe a GP surgery would be a good thing and we would like X thousand pounds by way of Section 106. It's absolutely shocking. I think there might have been a very small improvement, maybe in the last 18 months, but otherwise it's been really awful.
Thank you for raising that point. I think we all know what you're talking about, but that's not a problem for this committee. And so, Councillor Nichols.
Yeah, just about the monitoring money, does that cover any sort of enforcement of S106 at all, or is it just go to?
Basically, the monitoring fee is to support my role, and in effect, I am the enforcer. So I go around and actually monitor that the development has hit the payment triggers and actually is, you know, doing what they're supposed to do.
I suppose I meant the planning enforcement, but that's a
No,
separate, that's separate.
planning enforcement is a completely
It's
separate
separate.
thing, and yes,
Okay, thank
not
you.
me.
No.
Councillor Hart.
Sorry, just to come back on councillor Deering's point about the NHS, just because I work in the NHS and it's not really an issue of, we don't have so much problem of like building a building, we have a problem of staffing a building. The crisis comes in staffing, is finding people to come and.
Well,
your GPs
I'm mindful that we
and-
have an agenda here. I
Yes, we
think
are.
we're at risk of straying
But
a long
just
way
that,
off
you
it,
know-
but I can guarantee you that I don't know what your function in the NHS is, but there must be some office that deals with Section 106 inquiries. And our experience here over a long, sustained period of time is that their response has been very, very poor.
I'm not sure that that should be minuted, but thank you anyway. Are there any? Yes, Councillor Jacobs.
Hopefully a last one from me. Page 117, there's a table listing the S106 agreements, and the right-hand column, total funding for East Heights Council. I would expect to see a number in that column, and in some of the entries there is, but in others there isn't. There's text, and that text is fairly ambiguous. Deed of variation to modify the principal agreement. Are you able to clarify that for me?
Yes, basically that is it. It's a deed of variation comes about when a Section 106 needs to be amended, normally with some wording within the actual document. So I've listed them because they are basically just a deed of variation, and they are a legal document. The wording, it normally is to do with mortgagees or actual just text within the document, and it is just a legal change. But I've taken on board that I will list all of them because, you know, they are part of the overall development.
So there's no money attached to them?
No, no. If there is money in an agreement, I will actually list it. But if it comes about that they just want to change the word from an owner or a mortgagee within the actual original document, they use a deed of variation to actually do that, and I just actually note them. Because when you actually look on the planning website, you will see a whole list of Section 106 agreements, and it's just easier for everybody to actually be able to identify what year they were actually done in.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Jackie Bruce or Councillor Britton? So thank you very, very much, both of you, for being here this evening. And we do have a recommendation for the Audit and Governance Committee tonight to note and comment on the contents of this report and the 22-23 infrastructure funding statement attached as Appendix A on our agenda pack there. So can I have a proposer for the recommendation? Councillor Nichols, can I have a seconder? Go on, Councillor Hart, yes. All those in favour of approving this recommendation, please. And any against? Any abstentions? So that motion is carried. So, monitoring of Q2 corporate risk register for 2023-24. We have a new reporting format, which Stephen Linnett is going to explain in great detail to us. Can you explain this new format?
I wouldn't say great detail, Chairman. We leadership team over a number of Fridays looked again at the risk register, and what we've decided to do is to make it more focused. So we've very much focused on likelihood reduction and impact mitigation, and focused on what we're doing about those. So what that has done is resulted in less risks on the risk register, and it being more focused on action, as we felt the previous risk register was becoming very verbose and very wordy, and was becoming more of an essay about what was going on in the world in general. So what we've tried to do is to distill it right back down to very, very key risks, and look at the exact mitigations and likelihood reductions that we're doing, and giving the raw score before and the score afterwards. And this is not completed work because, and we simply ran out of time in order to do all of this. But also because it's a new format, we wanted to take members, a temperature check with members of the committee as to whether this was a better format, about whether we're missing something, whether we need to include something, where something's not clear. So it's very much for members to now tell me what their feedback on this is. I know Councillor Jacobs is a risk expert, so I'm expecting him to jump straight in on this one. So what we're looking for now is feedback from the committee about moving to this more focused reporting methodology.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I do feel very aware that the training at the beginning of this evening's meeting told us that there were several risks that we had to take into account as our treasury management. But Councillor Jacobs, maybe you'd like to comment on the presentation first.
Comment on this item rather than the presentation. Happy with the format, no particular comments on that. In terms of risk 4, key contractor, you've got the mitigated scores as being relatively low, C3. But does that take into account the potential of the dispute around the waste collection services?
My understanding is that the industrial dispute between Abaisa and the GMB union has been resolved.
That'd be a yes then.
Any other questions or comments from councillors, please? Councillor Williams.
Well, just a general comment for me that I think this is a considerable improvement on what we used to see. I think it is much clearer and much easier to digest, and I thank the officers for the work they've been doing.
I think that's a good vote of confidence. We are not aware of course, of what happened before, but the reduction of 13 risks to 8 is.
Yeah, if you remember back to the last committee, you had the old style reporting, which I think went on for 20 or something pages, and the risk register. Whereas this is very much a much shorter format of reporting. We feel it's better to concentrate actually on what we're doing to reduce the likelihood and what will happen to mitigate the impact. We think it's better to concentrate on that and to make that much clearer so that the members can see exactly what we're doing on each risk. We will give it a progress update in the progress update column in future, but what we wanted to do is cut down the sheer amount of reading that you were doing, because we didn't feel it was adding value, and to concentrate going very much back to what's the risk, what we're doing to reduce its likelihood, what we're doing to reduce to mitigate the impact if it does occur.
20 pages to 6. I thank you. Nick.
Thank you. I also welcome having sort of seen the version last time, and the more focused report is very welcome. I had a couple of comments on the format, and maybe this is personal preference to some extent, but and the focus on the actions absolutely really key. What I find useful in risk registers quite often is where there's a distinction between the risks and mitigations that are in place and happening and that have already having an impact, and then those sort of additional mitigations and actions and controls that are being looked at and worked on to reduce the current level of risk further to what is an acceptable level. In some cases, there may not need to be any further mitigations and actions because we're already accepting the level of risk with the current control environment. So the actions, great articulation of actions and mitigations in the report, but just distinguishing between those two categories. So the ones that are in place and being done, and we're comfortable with the level of risk, and then where we want to go further to reduce the current level of risk and what we're doing about it, really focusing on those secondary, that latter category, I think would be really helpful. And my second comment was one thing I did find useful in the last format was there was sort of a section called update on the current position, which had the owner's sort of current view in a couple of paragraphs around the risk and the sorts of things, I guess, that were keeping them awake at night or they were thinking about. And I found that really helpful. It's sort of slightly less formal than some of the structured comments and controls and mitigations, just to get a feel from the risk owner what is the current position? Am I concerned? Am I not concerned? So in those 2 or 3 paragraphs, it adds a bit, I guess, to the volume again. But I think if we could keep that input from the risk owners when we review every quarter, I would find that really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you care to comment on those 2 points?
I'll feed this back because we'll have another Friday LT committee meeting on.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Nichols.
I'd just like to say this is much, for me as a layperson, this is much easier to understand, and who's the risk owner. And I like the colour. I'm a visual person, so the colour coding really works for me.
Agreed. Any other questions or comments on this report? I think that that's a pretty good endorsement of the direction of travel, which is where we wanted to get to tonight. And do I understand that we're going to get this piece of work completed by the next meeting, 30th of January? So I think we all look forward to seeing that, but I would endorse personally what Nick has said about having that couple of paragraphs at the end, just saying, you know, what your feelings are. That'd be good. Okay, so we do have 2 recommendations for this item, detailed on page 137 of the agenda pack. The first is that the 2023-2024 Q2 corporate risk register be reviewed and the officer advised of any suggested improvements to the format of the risk register, and that the committee notes the risk register and actions being taken to control and mitigate that risk. I need a proposer for those 2 recommendations. Councillor Nichols, and the seconder, Councillor Hart. So, councillors, can all those who approve that motion, those recommendations, raise their hands? Thank you. Any against? And no abstentions. I think that's unanimous endorsement of your approach. So thank you very much. So the final thing we have to do tonight is to look at the audit and governance work programme, which is detailed on pages 144 to 160 of the agenda pack. Again, Mr. Lennox, can you introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On the work programme of the committee, the next meeting, we're proposing there's no training, simply because of the volume that will be on before the committee. So I am confident that the Assets Audit Services will be presenting their 2023-24 audit plan for the 2023 audit. And members will note at the bottom of the particular meeting is the 2022-23 audit plan from EY, from which I have zero confidence they will present anything. The word on the street is that EY have absolutely no intention of conducting 22-23 audits and handing the audit fees back and giving no assurance return on the audit. So we're trying to manage that situation now and trying to deal with that. We're still waiting further for government guidance. Deluxe has not yet said what it plans to do on all of that, but the general word on the street is that EY just do not have any resources to conduct the 22-23 audit, so they will finish the 21-22 and they will walk away. Well, that's what they used to be called. They're now called EY because of that, you know, PwC, KPMG, EY. But they will let their letters. That's the word on the street that we're hearing. In fact, we have heard rumours that Grant Thornton have been going around offering to audit pension funds for district councils who have got their 2022-23 audits done by other firms and who are waiting on that, because obviously EY does the county and the county pension fund, and they haven't, as far as the last time I spoke to the CFO at the county, they hadn't conducted the audit of the pension fund and they disappeared off the face of the earth. So I don't know if they have actually conducted subsequently that pension fund audit, but I haven't seen hide nor hair of an EY auditor for several months. So it rumbles on. So as I say, I have confidence that Assets Audit Services will be here with their audit plan. I have no confidence that EY will be here. The budget and medium-term financial plan will be here on the 30th of January for scrutiny, along with the investment strategy, the capital strategy, minimum revenue provision policy, the procurement strategy, and the Q2 forecast to year end. Our treasury management mid-year review will also come. You have the shared anti-fraud service progress report. I'm unsure whether the anti-fraud plan will be January or in May. Again, the shared internal audit service progress report will be here. The internal audit plan may be May. Your geodata protection update as well at this meeting, but that will generally be for noting and just be a report for noting. And as I said, I've got no confidence in 22-23 external audit will be here from EY, and of course your Audit and Governance Committee work programme report, which will be setting out what you'll be doing in the next municipal year. So it's quite a chunky agenda, and so most of which I have yet to write. If anybody wants to know what I'm doing on Christmas Day, I should be writing some of this. So yes, it will be a fairly chunky agenda. And as usual for the budget scrutiny, the chair and vice chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee are usually join the committee to conduct the budget scrutiny.
It's surprising news that we have an Audit and Governance Committee with no actual audit to review for 2022-23. But members, please, Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Chairman. You'll forgive me, I hope. I'm going to make exactly the same point I made at our previous meeting about the number of items on the agenda for the next meeting. As indeed at the last meeting I made about this meeting, because we were due to have our first look at the budgets at this meeting. Given that we've not had that opportunity, and therefore the January meeting will be our first opportunity to examine the budget, that's clearly going to be very, very important for all of us. I'm pleased, therefore, that there's no training on the agenda, but nonetheless, the agenda is still very heavy, and I do wonder, as I think we discussed last time, what opportunities there would be for any items which are just for noting. I think the term is covered over, or they can be reviewed outside of the meeting.
Deleted, I think, is the word.
Well, I presume that they are sort of required to be examined in some shape or form. But yes, I do question the programme and whether it can be adjusted in some way that at least the budget can be given
the single item meeting, almost single agenda,
well,
whatever.
Not quite
but,
so.
But is there, as James, any legal? Could you comment on this question, because I'm not sure that it's.
Well, presumably, I mean, they're not my reports, but presumably they're on the agenda because they do need councillors to cast their eye over them. I do take the point that Councillor Williamson is making, that the budget is a very important item and it deserves sufficient time to consider that item properly. I wonder if there are some that are purely for noting, no voting to take part on them, whether they could be provided outside of the meeting and members provide their responses that way. It is something that I've seen happen in some of our other committees. But again, they are not my reports, so I don't know what they
are. Councillor Deering. Sorry, let them.
I do have a comment, but I'll let these chaps have their chat first.
I shall hand you over to Stephen, who will just tell you what he's just told me.
Chairman, what I propose the committee does is operate a process called call over, in which all of these reports are on the agenda, and then the chairman will call over the reports that he believes should be discussed at the meeting, and that will probably be the budget items and obviously the external audit planning report for 23-24. Everything else that isn't called over shall be deemed that the recommendations, if they are noted, that it's been noted, or the recommendations required will be deemed that it's been approved, and members will vote on the call over. So if any member disagrees with an item on the call over, they can obviously vote against the call over.
Obviously.
But that's the process that I've used in previous councils, where if you've got a large agenda, you call over what you want to discuss, and the rest of it just goes through on a vote.
Yeah, okay. And presumably we will have the opportunity of a pre-meeting, as we did before this one, to discuss that.
Yes, the chairman will be having a pre-meeting as usual, yes.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Councillor Deering.
Yes, I mean, just to come in on there, I personally, I'd have absolutely no problem with what you just suggested there. And obviously, just to say that a pre-meeting only applies to the chairman and not to all members of the committee.
Yes,
so
no,
it doesn't take us any further at all. I was actually going to make a comment in relation to page 147. If I've got my pages under control. It's the comment in paragraph 3.1. Due to the problems in the local government external audit market, audit have been severely delayed. Cannot predict when audit will return to the timetable, and the proposal is that the accounts will be in effect signed off by a subcommittee. I just wasn't quite clear whether that was a proposal or it's in some way already been agreed. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. It doesn't sound quite right to me that that should go off to a subcommittee. And therefore, coming back to the previous point, just to ask the question, there's no intrinsic reason, is there, James, why this committee shouldn't meet on additional dates? We're not locked into the dates that are presently in the diary, so we can have an extra meeting if we need one.
Yes, as is the case with any of our meetings, if an additional one is required, then one could be called. Clearly, we do try and fit everything into the scheduled meetings that we've got for scheduling reasons that are set out very early on in the civic year. But there isn't a procedural reason why you wouldn't be able to have an extra meeting if that was deemed necessary.
So I must say, I do understand why you're making the comment in the paper here, but it does seem to me that the account should not be delegated to a subcommittee. It should come through the full committee. And if that needs an extra meeting, then we can have an extra meeting.
Is that a formal proposal, Councillor Deering?
I'm content to make it a formal proposal. But
would there be a seconder for that proposal?
I don't know. We'll find out.
Councillor Williamson, is any comment on that?
Just Chairman, because we didn't know when EY was going to do the audit. What we agreed in the last committee was that we'd have a subcommittee, and that subcommittee would meet during the day as soon as practicable to approve the accounts. And it was felt it was better to have a smaller subcommittee of members who were self-selecting, and the chairman said he would come on every occasion to do that, because we were aware that members of the committee work, and therefore what we wanted to do was not have a committee at night to do this, because basically the external auditor will come and will say about their external audit report, members will question them, then we go through the formal process of approving the statement of accounts and approving the annual governance statement. So the committee meeting will be about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and rather than have every member of the committee, it was felt better in the past. We did have one subcommittee to do that. If members are not happy with that subcommittee, then I'm quite happy with them coming in at 7 o'clock, and we can have a full committee meeting to discuss the accounts.
Councillor Deering.
I've absolutely no wish to be contentious on this. It just seems to me to be good housekeeping. In principle, if a meeting to sign off the accounts might be a short one, I don't particularly see why it is impossible to organise that in daylight hours. Equally, we're all here. We don't come here every day of the week. I imagine that we could convene a date that people can make in the evenings. And I didn't mean to go over old ground either. It just seems to me as a matter of principle, it should come through the full committee. That's all.
I totally sympathise with your point of view, and I think I would leave it up to the officers to decide what's actually practicable. Because yes, not every member might be able to come, but if we can have a quorum committee, then I think you're probably better off than the subcommittee.
Well, having got this far.
Yes, having got.
Sorry to come back to you, but you did ask if I was formally proposing, and I did, and then you asked for a seconder. I think we have a second.
We do,
so
yeah.
I think we've now got to the point where you need to take a vote on this. Actually, I'm really
And
sorry.
I have Councillor Hart.
Just to be, I mean, we could, as Councillor Deering said, we could have a full meeting. I think everyone would be willing to come, and we could just leave it to the office to decide whether it should be daytime or evening, because they also have homes to go to, I imagine, and another evening meeting might, they'd have to do a lot already. So I mean, I think all of us probably could make a daytime meeting. It's not going to be a long one.
Yeah.
To commit to that, I don't think anyone disagrees with me.
Unless anyone of the councillors have any comment or questions on that, I would like to put Councillor Deering's proposal to a vote. All those in favour that, would you just like to repeat what you're requesting?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cause a fuss. I think I'm requesting that, just to come back to the papers, sorry, that the intention that seems to be noted in paragraph 3.1 should not be carried forward, and that the statement of accounts, once they come in from the auditors, should be submitted to the full committee and not a subcommittee. That, and the meeting, if it needs a special, it's very wordy, I'm sorry, if it needs a special meeting of the full committee, officers will arrange one at a time that's mutually convenient.
And you're happy to second that, Councillor Williams?
I am.
So have you got a note of that, Michelle?
Got that.
Of course. Can all those councillors in favour please raise their hands? Anyone against? Any abstentions? That motion is carried, and we leave it up to you to arrange. And with that, I believe there are no urgent items, so yes? We haven't voted on the main recommendations on the audit. No, the two main recommendations for this item. So excited by Councillor Deering's. There are two recommendations for this item. To approve the work programme as set out in the report as amended, and to specify any specific training requirements. Do I have a proposer for that recommendation?
Well, Chairman, I think perhaps we need to add or to amend the recommendation, given what we've talked about regarding the items on the agenda for the next meeting.
That is a very good point. I almost think it should be a single item agenda for January the 30th on the budget. No, I don't think it can be. But how would you like to word this, Councillor Williamson? Please make an amendment.
Well, I might need some help from officers here, but essentially want to capture the fact that the various items on the agenda may be
Called over.
Others may not be. I'm not quite sure how to phrase that quite, but
yes.
If I may, I believe Councillor Williams wants to amend A to say approve the work programme subject to the operation of call over at the January meeting, comma, as set out in the report.
Got it, Michelle? Does that sound okay to you, sir?
that's perfect. Thank you.
Good, you can go home. No, we need to have a proposer and a seconder for that. Okay, Councillor Williams, second. Councillor Nichols. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. No abstentions, no one against. That does conclude, I think, everything. Yes, the are no urgent items. So that concludes the work of this evening at 8:48, 8:40, 8:43. Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much, councillors. Good evening.